I remember reading from some spiritual teacher, as we evolve, they phrased it as we are able to learn and grow through more and more joyful experiences and fewer challenging or painful experiences. So I was thinking of that in regards to your teachings. So contrast creates expansion. But if I'm more and more often in the vortex as time goes on, and I'm drawing in more and more of that positive energy, then am I, or are we, is one able to regularly be expanding powerfully, but with less and less contrast needed? Does that make sense?
The question is a good question, and we understand the premise from which the earlier statement was made. Mm-hmm. But consider this. If you are not consciously aware of emotion and what it means, and you are not deliberately aware of the grid as we are describing it today, so you are observing and not observing deliberately, just observing, and things are getting bigger and bigger, so that you know what you don't want, and you know what you do want, and then you really know what you don't want, and then you really know what you do want, and then you really know what you don't want, and you really do not know what you do want.
Yeah.
Your ability to discern and feel that vibrational spread is whatever it is. So what we are suggesting, we'll make our statement first, and then we'll walk through it until you understand all the depths and levels of what we are meaning by it. Your ability to, everything is perceptual. So if you're not delicately focused on vibration and reaching for subtle improvements, then the larger vibration is necessary for you to understand. It's like it's bigger and bulkier and needs to be. It's a little bit like little children like to stack up bigger toys. They like to play with those big square colored blocks because they can manage them. Yeah. And later they want Legos. And later they want itsy bitsy Legos. Where in the beginning, and who gets to decide? If you were watching someone new at the stacking process, taking pleasure from the bulkier blocks, or if you were watching someone more evolved in the stacking process and they're using more refined nuances or blocks, who gets to decide what the level of pleasure is? And yeah. if you are evaluating, as we always are, the perfection of a moment or the success of a moment by how it feels. So did that sort of make sense in relationship to the question? In other words, we would far rather that you have contrast in order to find discernment than contrast in order to find discernment. But once you've found the discernment, you will feel as much contrast in, as much emotion in small contrast as you earlier did in large contrast. Okay. So the premise of the question and answer are not quite valid with the laws of the universe as we know them to be. You see, you see what we're getting at?
Yeah.
Of course, we watch you. What you really are reaching for is balance. If you are overwhelmed, then you want more peaceful life. But if you've got a really peaceful life, then you're bored and you want something more stimulating. And if you get too much that's stimulating, then you want a more peaceful life. But if you have too peaceful of a life, then you get bored and you want something that's more stimulating. And so this contrast is something that is always coming to you based upon what you've got going with your grid. Yeah. Yes, you can become more deliberate, and yes, you will feel more satisfaction the more deliberate you become. This is a question that has been put to us many, many times over the years. this business of how deliberate am I supposed to be, is the question. In the beginning, we began by saying you create your own reality and you are the attractor of your own experience. And so you want to be a deliberate creator. You want to think deliberately. And then later, as we visited with so many of you for a while who were now getting very deliberate about what you want, we began putting more emphasis on the allowing part of it, because you were identifying what you wanted, but you were not up to speed with what you wanted. And so you were creating more of a crevasse between where you were and what you wanted, which was uncomfortable. So then we began offering words to help you to close that gap. In fact, every process that we've ever offered, and there are hundreds of them in past, present, and future experience coming, that every process that we've ever offered is about closing that gap, which is sort of what this question was about. How much contrast do I need to endure is sort of the way the physical question comes. How much contrast do I need to endure in order to be the best deliberate creator that I can be? And we say you get to choose all of it. And if the basis of your life is how good you feel, then you'll be able to work it out. You'll be able to figure it out. So when you are wanting to be a deliberate creator and you are sifting through contrast and knowing what you don't want and knowing what you do want and establishing your idea of what you do want, the question often comes from people who are listening to us, well, how deliberate should we be? Abraham, do you want us to set goals and really identify what we want, or do you want us to just sit back and chill? You say you want us to put our feet in the water and you want us to pet the cat, you want us to focus on allowing. So we began telling you about step 1, step 2, step 3. Step 1 is the contrast helps you to identify what you want, but if you are not a vibrational match to what you want, then you are sometimes offering resistance that does not allow what you want to flow into your experience. And so people have sort of been struggling a little bit with that. It's the basis of this question. How much contrast is of value? How much contrast do I need to really have the expansion that I want? So what we're wanting to explain here, and we think this grid conversation will make it more easy to explain, is that if you are aware that you are in the mode of attracting details that don't feel good to you when they come, you know that you are being too specific. And by that we mean you're talking too much, you're focusing too much, you're thinking too much about that subject. You're too specific. So now what you want to do is become more general. And there is nothing more general than your emotional basis. So what happens is, let us start in this other place. Esther and Mark were having a conversation, and their conversation got quite specific, and it was more specific than Esther could stay up to speed with, but she liked the idea of it. In that conversation, as it got more specific than she was ready for, it became a little uncomfortable, and it felt overwhelming to her. So in the specific conversation, Esther could feel that she was losing her alignment. Very subtle and not something very important to her, but she could feel that she was losing her alignment a little bit. So our encouragement, when you recognize that that is happening, is to get as general as you can. So Esther goes back to the thoughts. Things are working really well. They always figure out what to do. We have a really good setup happening here. It's taking them more time to set it up than is pleasing to Esther. They are hauling a lot of equipment. A lot of people are flying in. They spend many hours before you come stringing wires and making sure that everything is working just right. And so out of all of that, Esther is always longing for a simpler setup for them. So in the specifics, when you begin to feel yourself getting out of alignment, if you go back to the general statements, such as, it's working, we'll figure it out as we go. In the general statement, there is less resistance always than in the specific statement. So the rule of thumb that we've been offering is be as specific as you can be and still feel good. So then we notice, and you notice too, that when you're general for very long, first of all, is sort of a not very important point to discuss, because you can't hold yourself general for very long, because the grid will begin to fill in with more specifics. But as you go general, and you feel good while you are general, we'll talk more about that if you want more specifics, the grid begins to fill in with more specifics that feel good, like the general grid that you've established. And then, as you focus upon those specifics in a more general way, with your emotional ear to the ground, that you want to feel good while you're being more specific, then more specifics come. So the answer to your question is, when you're really good at dancing this dance, and you really can feel when you're getting out of alignment and you can bring yourself back into alignment, then the more specific you are, the better you will feel. Now hear this, because this really gets to the heart of your question. We want you to be up to speed with this, because we're right out on the leading edge. We haven't had this conversation before. In the specifics, there is a purity of vibration that is so powerful, because it brings such strength with it. For a number of reasons. You're aligning with the energy of non-physical. You gather all of that leverage, you see. It is better for you to be really general if you're not good at focus. But the better you get at focusing, the more satisfying it will be for you to be specific. You see what we're getting at? There'll be much more around that comes. We want to hear from you.
Well, I was just drawn to say before I was entertained by my response to the little technological breakdown. I immediately went into, oh no, what energy was I offering that co-created that? Like I did something bad. And then I went into, I'm in front of Esther talking to Abraham. All's good with me. I'm just thrilled to be here. And it'll all work out.
And I brought forward a question that highlights the very point that this very seminar has evolved to. I was part of the convergence of a demonstration, because the demonstrations always occur. That's your grid filling in. The grid filling in is the demonstration or the manifestation or the materialization of what you've got going on with your grid. We want you to not try to manage or measure or compare the manifestations between you and others. We want you to be infinitely aware of the manifestations and actualizations and materializations and cooperations and coincidences that are occurring as a result of your emotional vibrational grid. And once you leave this forum and you ponder what we talked about here, and by the end of the day, we promise you it will be clear to you. And then you begin to deliberately apply in your own experience the application of going general for the purpose of establishing your grid. Here's the details that will come to you will fill in so quickly that you will never again wonder, and your sense of worthiness and your ability to deliberately create will become a very powerful thing. And as you are, and you won't be nitpicking about whether your grid is general or specific in any moment, because it will be feeling as good as it can feel in either case. That's really what we want to say to you. Being more general, having more contrast is beneficial. Having small contrast is beneficial, because the focusing power makes up the difference. Did we say it yet in a way that you can hear it?
Yeah.
Go back to the kids with the blocks. That's the easiest way to see it. You want to be specific. So this is what we've come round to through all of these conversations that we've had with so many people for so many years. It feels terrible to sift through contrast and not know your power. It feels delightful to sift through contrast when you do know it. Because then you start looking at it like a buffet. How fun is it? Don't you love to watch the people who get behind the fast-moving machines? Don't they just love to explore their ability to control those vehicles at higher and higher and higher rates of speed? Now, many people would say it'd be a whole lot smarter if you just slow way down. And they would say, yeah, but it's way more fun. And others would say, oh, but it's so risky. And they would say, not for me. It's not risky for me. It's not risky for someone who knows what they're doing. It's not risky for someone who's played this game before. It's not risky for someone who's moved up little by little and gained control of what they're doing. You see what we're getting at?
Yeah.
So how do you decide what's better, to drive fast or to drive slow? And we say, you kind of got to mind your own business and just do what you feel like doing today. And if you are afraid to drive fast, don't drive fast. And if you're bored when you drive slow, speed it up.
Yeah.